Thank you, Representative Oliverson. Representative Moody's amendment that's before the body would allow parents to give their children this gender-affirming care if it's signed off by 2 doctors. Is that your understanding of the amendment?
That is my understanding, yes.
And you're opposing the amendment?
It's very similar to Representative Johnson's amendment, yes.
And you're opposed to the amendment?
Yes.
Representative Oliverson, is it fair to say that generally speaking in the medical field, there are risks in providing treatment and there are also risks in not providing treatment?
Yes, that is fair to say.
Is it fair to say that sometimes these are difficult decisions?
Yes, I would argue that these are difficult decisions.
Who usually weighs these different risks and makes these difficult decisions?
Well, I think, and again, obviously the short answer to your question is that in this case, because we're talking about minors, that parents are the ones that ultimately have to consent for medical and surgical treatments because we don't allow children this age to make these kinds of decisions. We don't believe that their judgment is mature enough to be relied upon. And quite frankly, Representative, I can't overemphasize the importance of that point because it speaks to one of the serious problems with American practices of gender medicine involving what is known as gender-affirming care, is that it places an extreme amount of reliance on the patient's own self-perception for a population that we wouldn't even allow to sign the permission slip to have the procedure. So I think that's counter, I mean, that's, in my opinion, that literally runs counter to logic.
And I agree with you that when it comes to minors, these difficult medical decisions are made by the parents.
Right.
The parents usually, especially those that lack medical expertise, rely on who?
Well, they would rely on the physician, and that is where the state comes in. It is the state's obligation to make sure that those that claim to be able to practice medicine and are capable of healing are actually acting in the best interest of the patient. And so that is the whole reason why we have a Medical Practice Act and a medical board, Representative.
Are there any cases where the gender-affirming care that's banned in this bill would be beneficial to treating a child's gender dysphoria?
I do not believe that the treatments that we are removing here are beneficial at all.
So you're saying there will never, in the entire state of Texas, be a case in which the gender-affirming care that's approved by the various associations would be beneficial to treating gender-affirming care?
Respectfully, Representative, scientists don't use the word never or always. But what I would be submitting to you is that based on the available evidence and 4 independent systematic reviews of the entirety of the literature, there's no evidence to conclude that this benefits at all.
But so you acknowledge there may be a case in this big state of ours when this care would be beneficial? I
acknowledge that at this time, the science tells us there is no conclusive evidence of benefit, period.
I hear that, Dr. Oliverson. I'm just asking.
I understand that you're trying to get me to say something different, but I go back to what I said earlier. Science doesn't deal in these sort of absolutes. I am telling you, I'm answering your question to the best of my ability based on the science, not based on sort of where we want to go from a legal perspective or from your perspective as a lawmaker. Just please understand, I'm not trying to be evasive, but I'm answering your question based on the science.
Here's my problem is you said medical professionals don't deal in absolutes. You don't want to deal in absolutes, but this bill is an absolute ban on gender-affirming care. Is that correct?
There is no evidence that this is helpful and a growing list of harms.
I just want to make sure you're answering my question. Is this an absolute ban on gender-affirming care?
This is an absolute ban on medical and surgical procedures used for the treatment of gender dysphoria in people under the age of 18. I think that's a more complete answer. I think it's essentially the answer to your question.
Are there doctors in Texas who disagree with you on this?
Sure.
Does the American Academy of Pediatrics disagree with you on this?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Representative, because the American Academy of Pediatrics disputes with itself. However, they actually have a bad habit of suppressing their own members' willingness or desire to engage in the scientific debate about this very issue. There were resolutions brought before the House of Delegates most recently at the AAP asking them to revisit their position on this. And the board of directors refused to allow their membership to have a scientific debate. So that seems to me very much like shutting the whole conversation down, which is anathema to science.
I just want to ask again, does the American Academy of Pediatrics, in their official position, disagree with you on this?
I think what I'm saying to you is that the American Academy of Pediatrics at this point cannot be relied upon to reliably examine the evidence themselves. Hence, I'm not interested in what they have to say.
You're not interested in what the American Academy of Pediatrics has to say?
I think they have more or less discredited themselves by being unwilling to actually engage in a rigorous scientific debate on their own policy.
I want to talk about this amendment that Representative Moody has brought before us that would allow parents to give this important health care to their children if 2 doctors sign off on it. You said you're opposed to this amendment. I, for one, trust parents and doctors, not politicians, to make these decisions. But I want to see, Representative Oliverson, if you would be willing, I do have amendments to the amendment drafted. If we replace the word 2 with the word 3, so would you allow a child to receive this health care if it's approved by their parent and 3 doctors?
I would not. For the same reasons that I articulated when Representative Johnson laid out her amendment, and that is that there are fundamental flaws in the science underpinning gender-affirming care in America. Hence, I don't think it can be relied upon, no matter how many gender-affirming care doctors agree. Their testimony is not to be relied upon.
Would you allow a child to receive this health care if it's approved by their parent and 5 doctors?
You can keep quoting numbers all night, but I think I've answered the question that there's no number of doctors that would make me comfortable.
There is no number of doctors that would make you comfortable with allowing parents to give this health care to their children. And you're, Representative Oliver, is an anesthesiologist, correct?
I think we've established that already, yes.
And you said that the experts in this gender-affirming care are pediatric endocrinologists?
We heard from them, yes.
And
those are experts.
And you've acknowledged that the Pediatric Endocrine Society disagrees with you on this legislation?
I don't know what their position is on this legislation, but I believe their position is in alignment with WPATH, whose position is to support gender-affirming care, which is not scientifically supported.
And we don't have a pediatrician who serves in this body?
No, we do not.
And we don't have a pediatric endocrinologist who serves in this body?
We do not.
So we have a group of politicians, none of whom, as you acknowledge, are experts in this field, making a decision for the experts. Is that fair to say?
I think our job, Representative, is to represent our districts to the best of our ability.
I think it's clear that this is not about science or medicine, and certainly not about keeping kids safe. I think this is about discriminating against people who are transgender, and I urge you to reconsider your position on the Moody Amendment.
Okay.